Welcome back to Enable Talks, the podcast from Enable Ireland's virtual service.
We're delighted to bring you another episode. We want to start by saying a huge thank you for all the brilliant feedback on our first two podcasts. Your support and engagement means a lot to us, and we're excited to keep the conversation going.
In this episode, we're diving into the European Accessibility Act, a major piece of legislation that could make a real impact on accessibility across Europe.
And hosting this discussion, we have Claire Pringle and Pádraig Dormer, both service owners who are now employees of Enable Ireland's virtual service. This service was created during COVID and is a great example of co-production where people with lived experience shape the services they use.
So, what does the European Accessibility Act mean? How could it change daily life? And why is accessibility so important? Claire Pringle and Pádraig Dormer will break it down, so let's get started.
Welcome to Enable Talks, Episode 3, the podcast that brings people information that they need to know about to make the world more inclusive. We're taking a look at something that's going to have a pretty big impact on a lot of people, the European Accessibility Act, or EAA for short. You know how sometimes you wish that everyday things like the products and services we all use were designed with everyone in mind? Well, that's exactly what this act is all about.
Yeah, it's really about kind of like changing the mindset around inclusivity, building it from the ground up instead of just like an afterthought.
Okay, so let's talk about it. What is the EAA all about?
Well, to break it down, it's all about increasing the availability of accessible products and services throughout the EU. We're talking things like companies, computers, smartphones, ATMs, ticket machines, and even things like ebooks and public transportation.
Okay, that's a lot to cover. And this is all coming into effect June 28, 2025. That's not that far off.
Right around the corner. And one of the things I think is really interesting about the EAA is it's really focused on the same standards across all EU countries.
So it's all the same standards? Okay, so why is that such a big deal?
Imagine if you traveled to a new country and all their power sockets were different. You'd need a different adapter for every place you visit, right? The kind of what it was like with accessibility before GAA. Different countries had different rules. It was confusing for businesses and honestly not great for people with disabilities either. But now with one set of rules, things should get a lot easier for everyone.
So this is a win-win for businesses and individuals.
But it's more than ticking the boxes. The EAA is about like a change in how we think about inclusivity, and that can open up so many doors.
Like what kind of doors? I imagine this will make a big difference on employment for people with disabilities. Is that correct?
Yeah, a more accessible world means a more inclusive workforce in the future. And think about it. People with disabilities bring a whole lot of skills and ideas, especially when it comes to accessibility.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So taking things back a bit, how do you see this creating a more inclusive society overall?
Well, I think altogether the EAA is about removing the barriers that prevent people with disabilities from fully being involved in society. You know, it's about creating equality, independence, and dignity for all.
Now, you mentioned all sorts of things this act covers. A lot of stuff, right? I remember seeing something about e-readers and even those interactive kiosks you see everywhere these days.
It includes things like computers and smartphones, of course, but it also covers things like ebooks, e-commerce platforms, ticket machines, and ATMs. Really, the aim is to make those everyday interactions available to all.
Okay, so who's making sure all this actually happens? Like, who keeps track of it all?
So there are different organizations in church that look after different areas. For example, for products, you have the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission. They handle things like ebooks and those interactive kiosks you mentioned.
Okay, so the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission looks at the products. What about services?
So for service, you have people like the Commission for Communication Regulation, which looks after electronic communication services, and the Media Commission, which oversees the audio-visual media services.
Okay, that makes sense. So you've got all these different groups. Is anyone making sure they're all on the same page?
Yes, the National Disability Authority, or the NDA, plays a big role in helping and guiding all these authorities on accessibility requirements. So they make sure that everything is straightforward and that everyone knows what they need to do.
Okay, good. So just to be clear, this applies to all companies that wants to do business in the EU, right? No matter where they're actually based.
That's exactly right, Claire. If they want to be in the European market, they need to follow these accessibility guidelines. But here's something I think is interesting. The EAA outlines what needs to be achieved, but not necessarily how.
Oh, really? So how do companies know what they need to do to meet the requirements?
Well, that's where things called harmonized standards come in. Think of them like agreed upon plans for accessibility that companies can use, so they're going along with the EAA.
Okay, Harmonized standards. Break it down for me a little, please.
Yeah, basically, they're like approved in advance guides for accessibility. And what's great is that there are several new and revised harmonized standards being developed especially for the AIA, covering things like ICT products, which is information and communication technology products and services. Support services are even emergency communications.
Interesting. So companies can follow these plans to make sure they're meeting the requirements. But what about the built environment, like buildings and physical spaces? Does the EAA cover that too?
The EAA does include requirements for the built environment, but we in Ireland actually choose not to adopt that part.
Oh, okay. So each country can pick which part of the EAA they want.
They had the option to have some or and not others. And in the case of Ireland, Ireland decided against the built environment requirements.
What if you want to learn more about the EAA in general? Are there any resources out there for that?
There are tons of resources out there, like webinars and videos explaining DAA in more detail. Places like the NDA Ability Net and the European Disability Forum are great places to start. We'll make sure to include links of those in the show notes.
Actually, while working on this episode, the Enable Virtual Service team researched to find an easy read document on the European Accessibility Act, but we couldn't find one, so we decided to create one ourselves.
Yeah, you'll find the easy read version linked in the show notes. Hopefully, it helps more people understand what the EAA is all about.
So we've talked about what it is and why it matters. But what about the how? How is this all going to actually work? Who's making sure that companies are following these new rules?
That's where those different rule-making bodies come in. Like we talked about for products, you have the Competition Commission and Consumer Protection Commission, or CCPC. They're going to be keeping a close eye and making sure that companies making and selling things like smartphones, e-readers, computers in the EU are meeting the accessibility rules.
And we talked about how there were different authorities for services as well, like the Commission for Communications Regulation and the Media Commission. It sounds pretty complicated, honestly, with so many different groups involved.
Yeah, it sounds very complicated, but there is a lot of things to look at. But each group is responsible for overseeing accessibility in their own specific area.
And then you have the National Disability Authority, the NDA, providing guidance and expertise to all these other organizations, like the accessibility experts, making sure everyone is on the same page.
Yeah, they are clear. You can think of it as a team effort with everyone working together to make this happen. And it's not about catching companies either. It's about support and guidance as well. The NDA is a great resource for companies who want to learn more about the EAA and how to make sure they're complying with it.
I did want to look at something you mentioned earlier about Ireland not adapting the EAA's built environment requirements, right?
That's a very important point. So while the EAA does set accessibility standards for physical spaces, each country had the option to adopt or not to adopt those specific requirements. Ireland decided not to, meaning those rules don't apply here.
So while we're making great progress in terms of digital and service accessibility, the physical environment might still be a challenge for some people.
That was a great conversation, and a huge thanks to Claire and Porrick for breaking down what the European Accessibility Act is all about. Thanks for listening.
And we'll catch you on the next Enable Ireland Virtual Service podcast, Enable Talks.